Welcome back to the presentation on how to raise money for your ministry. Part 2 of this event is focusing in on you must make your case. I've been working with congregations. I've also led a number of organizations over the years, and I can tell you a number one important rule of financial development. It is this: he or she who makes the best case wins. It's as simple as that. In working with youth ministers in particular over the years, youth ministers are generally people that are extroverted, they're outgoing, they're very relational kinds of people, they want to connect. And to force them into the discipline of making a case is very difficult. That's not where their natural default modality is, to do that kind of work. But when they do make their case, and as they make their case, they can really help support and nurture their ministry. That's where we're going to go. The case for support is essential and includes your mission, your vision, your purpose, programs, and services. It's a clear delineation of why gifts are needed and what those gifts will do. A case represents your plan over time. Generally, when you're putting a plan together, especially if you're wanting to raise money that's going to go beyond just an immediate need, if you're trying to build it over time, you want to build it in such a way that the donor can see, if I turbocharge or if I help this program here, it's going to turbocharge this process for the next 3 years. And obviously, many donors will ask the question, okay, if I give funds up front here to make this happen, what are you doing to put in place so that it's sustainable after my funds have been expended? That's part of making the case. Specific fundraising efforts must be placed in the context of a larger plan. Donors need to see the big picture and how any particular effort fits into the big picture. And so really the hardest part about raising money is getting your case and plan together. This requires a tremendous amount of decision making. In fact, I think this part of the process is really the hard part. It is so hard that Roger Field, former president of Wartburg Seminary, a leader that I highly respect, PhD, leads faculties, been in academia his whole life, said to me, I hate long-range planning because it's so darn hard. So if you find this difficult, don't be surprised. That's sort of the way it is. What's nice is once you've got your case and you're raising your money, you know where you're going with your ministry. You have that sort of sense of freedom that comes from not having to reinvent it or make it up every day as you go along. But it does take some discipline. So in order to make a case, it's very important, first of all, to understand the difference between outputs and outcomes. Most donors are interested more in outcomes than outputs. Most people make the mistake of writing their case to outputs. So let's work that through. Outputs have to do with hard numbers, totals, measurable results. Outputs don't necessarily mean that change has taken place. That's really critical. Outputs might be how many kids showed up at an event or how many people went on that mission trip. It's the numbers kind of a game. Most donors really don't care about the numbers. Most donors are most interested in transformation. Is it making a difference? Are people different as a result of being a part of this or that activity? Outcomes have to do with aligning with your core values and your mission and your vision. Outcomes report how things have changed or been transformed. Transformation, when you're writing a case, you're really making a case for how transformation will happen. And evaluation is very important, and you need to report often. You got to do evaluations to report both outputs and outcomes, but output evaluations report the numbers and outcome evaluations tell the story. In all financial development, donors, anybody who's interested in sharing of their wealth, what they want to hear is the stories. They want to hear the personalized, relational things that happened, that took place, that made a difference for people. And you have to work with your context as you're developing your case. What is the overall mission of the congregation? Obviously, whatever you're designing to raise funds for has to fit into the larger scheme of the congregation. And youth ministry is most effective when it integrates with the larger thrust, the larger flow of the congregation. It's not a sidecar. It's not a silo on the side of the barn Children, youth, and family ministry is the barn. It needs to be at the very center of things. What are the unique cultural attitudes and practices of the congregation regarding fundraising? Congregations and people have all sorts of weird attitudes about money. It's not unusual. In fact, I've seen this quite often in the young adults that I work with. It's not unusual to hear these young adults say, I have no idea what my family's attitude is about money. Or they may have only a very slim understanding of what their parents did or what their primary caregivers did. And so it's sort of like we're willing to talk about everything, including sex, but we're not willing to talk about money. Thus, it is so close to us. Who are the people that need to be a part of that conversation? Certainly the pastor, stewardship committee, youth board. These are questions you would ask and explore as you're developing your case. Do issues of timing need to be considered? I said earlier that that donors want to give to many things. For example, you may have something that you're really excited about. You want to give money to the organ fund. For me personally, that's not going to push a button that I'm going to get excited about. But someone else may have an appeal going on in the congregation around, say, children's ministry or a mission trip to Guatemala. Now, that's something I personally might get excited about. So these two appeals are not necessarily competing against one another. What they will do is they'll hit different people's buttons upon that which gets them excited. That's what that turns them on and gets them interested in giving. And how prepared is the congregation to think theologically about giving? Does some educational groundwork need to be laid? By whom, when? Preaching, the attitude of the senior pastor and or the leadership of the congregation is critical at this point. If people think of giving as begging, and we're going to get to that in section 3, then this is very difficult to do. I'm going to teach you how to become a blues brother, not a beggar. More, not less, requests for money generate gifts. This is a mistake I often see in congregations. Congregations will say, well, we're raising money for the building program right now, or we're doing this particular piece, and that's our priority. That's okay, but again, remember, not everybody's excited about your building program. Not everybody wants an organ, but they may give to something else. Now, again, you have to nuance this a little bit. Perhaps if you want to maximize your ability and your funds, you might say, we don't really want to kind of try to get on the airwaves while the building campaign is going on. Maybe we'll hold off on that. But what's most important is that the congregation is in the habit of giving. When the building program is done, people may have to say, I've got to back off for a little bit, I've made some commitments. But what's critical is they're in the habit of giving. So they'll do it. It may not just be at that time. It will happen a little later on. And research has clearly shown, this is right out of the Aldi Institute, or the Aldi Organization, Association for Lutheran Development Executives. Research has clearly shown that congregations that ask often and ask for many causes are the most generous of congregations. Ripple, not pie. That's how it works. I want to close this segment with a little bit of a story about experience I had as I began to learn about financial development. A number of years ago, I was a camp director in southeast Wisconsin, and it was a camp that had some pretty big financial problems, and I was beginning to learn how to deal with all of that. We had a board member who brought a member to our camp one day from his congregation. His name was Andy. He wanted me to just get to know the guy. So I did. We walked around the camp, built a little relational time. About a week later, Andy sent me $100. I thought, that's great. He's joined our giving club. I was very happy about that. I called the pastor. I said, well, that was nice of you to bring him by. We got a gift. He said, well, and he told me more about Andy. He told me about the business he was in. His business was selling hot tubs, pool tables, and fireplace inserts. And he said that he had a number of stores throughout this particular area in Milwaukee, and he was a man not only of generosity, but a man of means. So the following year, the pastor brings Andy out to our camp again. And this time, I'm thinking, okay, this guy sells fireplace inserts. We can work with that. I've got five fireplaces at our camp. All of them suck heat right out of the building. So I made a point of lighting all the fires and all the fireplaces at our camp, so when Andy would come, he would feel the cold draft just kind of going through our buildings. Andy came, he sees the problem, he says, Paul, what's wrong? You need some fireplace inserts. I said, yeah, I do. You know anybody who's got fireplace inserts? He laughs. About a week later, a truck pulls up to our camp with 5 fireplace inserts. So Andy is really generous. Again, we begin to develop this relationship. The following year, we're doing a quilt auction at our camp, and we want to raffle off or auction off some hot tubs. That was my idea. Who do I know who's got hot tubs? So I call Andy. He says, yeah, he'll donate a couple. A week later, truck pulls up, 2 $5,000 hot tubs, mobile hot tubs, land on our camp, getting ready for our Saturday quilt auction. When we get into the quilt auction, there's some bidding going on for the hot tubs, and Andy is there, but no one knows who Andy is. And he's not particularly happy with the price, with the auctioning, what's going on. He comes up to me, and he grumbles a little bit about they're not bidding high enough, and he looked across the way, and I'll protect this guy's name. He looked across the way, he said, who is that guy over there that's bidding on these hot tubs? And I told him who it was. I said, he is a man of means. I knew that. And he started bidding on his own hot tubs. So now we've got this thing going, and I'm the only one there who knows that the guy across the way is totally being rolled by the guy who owns the hot tubs. So the bidding goes on. Finally, Andy looks at me, are you pleased? I said, I'm pleased. He was too. He quit bidding. The other guy got the hot tubs, thought he'd gotten a real deal, and he'd been jacked about $2,000 on the bidding. The following summer, now that we know we have this relationship, Andy got a good laugh out of all of that. The following summer, I went to Andy as a part of our capital campaign, and I asked him for a $50,000 gift over 5 years for our camp. In the 1980s, I mean, that's a big gift anytime, but in the 1980s, that was a huge gift, especially for an outdoor ministry. Andy looked at me in that conversation. He said, man, Paul, I didn't think you were going to hit me up that high, which is a good response. It's not a no. And so he said, I'll have to think about it. But because I knew enough about this guy, he's an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs, they all love match challenges. They love competition, that sort of thing. I said to Andy, Andy, I really don't want your $50,000. He said, so what are you talking about? I said, well, what I want you to do is offer it as a match challenge to our board of directors and our staff. He said, that I'll do. Went back the following September to our board, said, we got $50,000, yay! I said, but you all have to come up with $50,000. Oh, and so now the board and the staff are talking about that, and they're starting to work up their pledge plans. And a member of our board comes up to me. Her name is Mary. And she says to me during a break, Paul, I'm going to make your day. I said, how are you going to do that? She said, I'll match Andy's gift. And she's a teacher in Madison, Wisconsin. I had no idea she was a person of that kind of means. And then she tells me this. My husband, Milt, was killed on a flight from Las Vegas back to the Madison on a chartered flight a couple of years ago. The airline was found culpable. There was a huge settlement. She said, I've got all this money. And then she says, and guys, when a person says this, you're moving to holy ground now. She says to me, Milt and I always said that if we had money, we'd give it to kids. And she's crying, and I'm crying. I almost cried telling the story. And so all of a sudden, the whole thing about stewardship is really about what's going on in the heart, is right there in front of me. So I called in the executive committee. We told the story again. It's a powerful, powerful moment. But I said, Mary, don't match Andy's money. The board and the staff are going to do that. I'd like you to go out, and I'd like your gift to be a match challenge to our giving club. She said, okay. So then I sent out a letter to our giving club. These are people in our organization that have been giving $100 or more during that year. And I said, we need to raise $50,000, but you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. Okay, can't take it out of the annual fund giving club to give it to Mary's gift. And within 6 months, we had an additional $50,000. Ripple. Andy was the rock. It just kept rippling and rippling. Before we ever publicly launched our capital campaign, we had $250,000 in hand for that campaign. And it all was about rippling. It was all about rippling. I celebrated that story with the pastor who had brought Andy to our church the first time. It was an incredible kind of an experience. As truly, if you go back to Lutherdale Bible Camp today, you will see the Di Giovanni Commons, that's Andy, and you'll see the Bakken Chapel, that's Mary. That's probably as good a place to stop right now. What I'd like you to do during this next break is talk a little bit about when you have been blessed by your generosity, either received or given. And in the case of Mary, it was a blessing for her to give as it was as much for us to receive. Let's pause.